மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. தேங்க்யூ.
Welcome to chapter 5, which is going to be all about mating nets. And what I've done for this chapter is I've just collected some of the most common mating patterns that you'll find in the endgame and in endgame studies in general. And I've put them all into this one chapter so you can kind of drill them and really hone in on that pattern recognition. There's not a whole lot to explain when it comes to checkmate. Mating the opponent's king is usually good, and it often requires using your pieces as effectively as possible, which, as you'll see in many of the exercises here, can include your king as well. But I really think that this is all about just drilling the ideas and solving the tactics and really working on remembering those patterns for the future. I'd like to show a couple of examples in this video showing some nice ideas and common types of mating nets. And this first one comes from a study from Leonid Kubel, another fantastic Russian composer, really one of the greatest of all time. And this one is, once again, white to play and win. We have a really tricky endgame in front of us. Both sides have their passed pawns. White has an extra bishop, but black has a very clear threat in the position, which is to play h5, h4, h3, and h2, and simply promote one of their pawns. White's king is behind black's pawn, which means white is not really able to stop it. And the bishop on g1 is also kind of powerless because the bishop needs to stay controlling this g1 square and is not in time to blockade black's h-pawn. So what can white do? Well, white actually wins this one by bringing the king over towards the queen side in order to actually set up a fantastic mating net. And it's really, really cool how this ends up working. So the right move is king f7. And white simply heads towards the queen side, but also threatens to play king to g6, meaning if black makes some move with the king, like king to b5, well then white will play king to g6, simply take the h-pawn, and white will be completely winning, because black's king is stuck on b5 here. Black can play king to a4, but black can never really take this a-pawn, as that will allow white's b-pawn to simply start running and promote. So white can take this one, and after king takes a3, b5, the game is over. So instead of king to b5, it's critical for black to push the h-pawn, and if white tries to continue chasing with king to g6, here of course the king is not going to be able to catch up, and black is actually going to be winning this one. So what can white do instead? Well, the right way is to continue with king to e6. And what white is doing is white is keeping the king heading towards the queen side, and as we'll see, the king wants to reach this magic c6 square, where it's going to be able to attack and help in the mating of black's king. But white is also keeping the king side in mind, as white's king is still able to bounce back. Once again, if black were to play a move like king to b5, then white plays king to f5, and black's h-pawn is simply going to be stopped. h4, king g4, and white is winning. So once again, after king to e6, black is forced to keep advancing with h4. Here, white continues once again with king to d5. And now let's take a look at what happens after h3. White plays the move king to c6. And you might be wondering where exactly is the mate? Well, black continues h2, no other move at this point. And now comes the real idea, bishop to b6. So white stalemates black's king on a6 here and introduces the threat of b5, which is mate. And even though black can promote to one of two queens, there is no defense against this threat, and white is just winning the game. g1 equals queen, b5 checkmate, and game over. So this is kind of the key mating net that white needed to play for from the beginning, planting the bishop on b6 and following up with b5 checkmate. And once again, important to really point out here that after the move king to d5, if black did not play this h3 move, for example, black tried once again to play king to b5 and avoid the mating net, well, here white's king would once again be in time with king to e4, h3, king to f3, and after h2, white is just barely in the nick of time here with bishop takes and king takes g2, winning the game. Now white is left with two passed pawns on the queen side. Black's king can never do anything about these, and all white needs to do is take this pawn on h2, bring the king back over to the queen side, and slowly win the resulting king and pawn endgame. It was also good enough for white to simply take king takes g2 here. At this point, h takes g1, king takes g1. We're left with the exact same endgame, and white is just winning this one. So a really cool study. This is actually a lot harder than the rest of the puzzles you'll see in this chapter. They're going to be a lot simpler and just focusing on the mating net at hand. But it's really nice to see this theme of the mating net come up in such a high level study. And this is an idea that white needs to be playing for right from the get-go, bringing that king to c6 and setting up this mating net with bishop to b6 followed by b5 equals checkmate. So you're going to be seeing a lot of minor pieces, kings and pawns delivering mate in this chapter. This next example is puzzle number 5. And here it's white to play and win. I would really encourage you to pause the video at this point and try to solve it on your own. And here we have just a rook and knight against the queen, but black's queen here is a little bit sidelined on a5. And after the nice quiet move knight to f6, black's king is simply stuck in the corner here. Black has no defense to the threat of rook h7 mate. There's just simply nothing the queen can do. Rook h7 mate is coming and it's game over. So checkmates don't always have to come with check. A lot of times you simply have to come up with a good quiet move that traps the enemy king and setting up the mate next move. This puzzle is kind of a good example of that. I believe this mating pattern is known as the Arabian mate, when the rook and knight combine to give checkmate to a king in the corner. And yeah, very, very good pattern to know for the endgame when the rook and knight can coordinate like this. Our next example here is puzzle number 13 from the chapter, and I just wanted to include this one because it's such a elegant study and a very, very classic idea here. White is just left with a knight, a single knight, which is normally not enough to checkmate. In fact, two knights in many cases are not enough to mate on their own. But here, because black's king is already stuck in the corner and this pawn is on h3, white can actually force black into what we would call a self-mate or a helpmate, where the opponent is actually forced to help you checkmate their own king. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you'd like to solve the puzzle on your own, feel free to pause the video at this point. But white can actually win the game with the move knight to f1 here. A really, really nice idea. Of course, white is taking away the h2 square away from black's king, which means that black only has one legal move in the position, and that is to play h3 to h2. This is actually a really nice example of Zugzwang, which is a chapter that's coming up in this course, where because black has to make a move here, black actually ends up losing the game. If black could just do nothing and pass, then black would actually be totally fine. But no, because black has to abide by the rules of chess and has to make a move, after h2, black's own king is stalemated in the corner, and after knight to g3, we have a really cool mate on the board. So a really, really nice idea here where white first plays knight f1, forcing black to advance the pawn and trap in their own king, and then deliver the mate with knight to g3. I just want to quickly point out here the knight e4 would not work. It does work if black plays this move h2, then of course we do get knight g3 checkmate. But if black can continue with king to h2 here, then there's no way for white to win the game, and instead white would have to try to revert back to the previous plan of bringing the knight to f1, inducing that pawn forward, and then bringing the knight back to g3 with mate. So yeah, really cool idea based on this concept of Zugzwang. I just wanted to throw this one in here because it's a really, really classic one, and hopefully you have a good understanding of how you can actually checkmate with just a single knight on the board. With that, I'm going to leave you to solve the rest of the puzzles in this chapter on your own. Once again, I would encourage you to spend up to 5 minutes per each problem. You can definitely take more time if you feel like you need it. Really, really make sure to review the solution of all the puzzles that you get wrong so you can fully understand the answer and retain the ideas for the future. With that, I'll wish you the best of luck in solving the upcoming exercises, and I will see you in the next chapter. Take care.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.